As a small business owner, my favorite thing about posting a job on LinkedIn is that when I hit post, I clock out and LinkedIn clocks in.
LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, get qualified candidates, and manage them all in one place. Plus, LinkedIn extends the reach of your job post by allowing you to share it with your network. And hiring managers that add a hiring frame to their LinkedIn profiles receive 2 times more qualified applicants. Go to linkedin.com/achieve to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
So good, so good, so good.
New markdowns up to 70% off are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. Fresh kicks, spring tops, new dresses. There's always a score.
I mean, the denim section is unreal.
Why do I rack? All the dresses.
I always find something amazing.
Head to your Nordstrom Rack store to find can't-miss deals on all the spring things. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
Hey, this is MICHAEL Altman.
And this is DAREN DOCHTERMAN.
And this is Ashley Miller.
And we are the inglorious
Treksperts.
And today we're talking about, we have a can-do attitude today.
Oh, my.
Because we're going to be talking about none other than Khan Noonian Singh. And to do that, we're thrilled to welcome back to the podcast. You know him as the co-creator of Perception for TNT. He was a writer on such shows as Star Trek Voyager and Star Trek Enterprise and Star Trek Enterprise. Oh. And he also was a writer producer on the Last Ship and a whole bunch of other stuff. And it's MICHAEL SUSSMAN. Welcome back, Mike.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Hey.
Absolutely. Well, today's going to be a fun one. We thought it would be interesting to talk about why the deep fascination with this character of Khan. It seems to keep coming back, and you keep coming back. Obviously, Khan was a character that was introduced back in Space Seed.
Captain's log, stardate 3142.3. Slightly over 2 centuries ago, a group of scientists planned for a race of supermen and created conquistadors.
Name, Khan Noonian Singh.
From 1992 through 1996, absolute ruler of more than a quarter of your world.
Well, either choke me or cut my throat.
You fled. Why? Were you afraid?
I've never been afraid.
But you left at the very time mankind needed courage.
We offered the world order. I intend to take this ship.
Will you assist me?
Oh, please, Khan, don't ask me.
Leave me then. The battle begins again. Only this time is not the world will win. It's the universe. Happy? You're no match for me. It does not matter. The captain is dead.
And yet we've seen him return again and again, some more substantively, other times as brief fan service cameos. But we haven't been able to escape the gravitational pull of this really three-dimensional, fascinating, not villain, antagonist. And I wonder what we would chalk that fascination to. I've said this before, Darren, that, back in the days in the 70s when all there was the original series, you didn't hear the kind of love for Space Seed that it gets now. Now you can't look at a top 10 list or people talk about Star Trek's greatest episodes without hearing Space Seed. But pre-Wrath of Khan, I don't think it was held in such esteem.
Well, I wouldn't exactly go that far. It certainly wasn't on everyone's, top 10 list. But it's still always been a great performance by Ricardo Montalban, and it is a memorable episode because this is one of the only antagonists who wasn't stupid or wasn't backwards thinking or wasn't an inferior adversary to Kirk. This is someone who could theoretically have taken over and won the whole episode, but it's it's a good story. It's an interesting backstory. It's one of those things that fills out the history of Star Trek in an interesting way. I mean, after all, from 1992 to 1996, he was absolute ruler of more than a quarter of our world.
Those were some dark years. I remember those years.
Yeah,
they were. The 90s were so weird, man.
Yeah.
Like Pearl Jam did a whole concept album about the eugenics. It was crazy.
It was Pearl Harbor Jam.
That's right.
So, Mike, would you agree this idea that, of Khan being this fascinating villain because antagonist because he was as smart as Kirk and he was physically superior to Kirk? Like, it's very rare that Kirk meets someone, it's like with James Bond. It always says James Bond met his match, right? And then this was, has Captain Kirk met his match? In a way, Khan not only is his match, but superior, but it was his ego and his narcissism that brought him down.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, it's hard not to conflate Khan or Wrath of Khan with Space Seed because Kirk very nearly was defeated. It seemed, the Enterprise being attacked, a lot of people being killed, and Spock dying. Spoiler alert. In the future film.
Mike, we don't do spoilers on the show. I really wish you had said that.
Oh, damn it. You can cut that out, right?
Spock dies.
But, I don't know. I mean, I love Space Seed. It's definitely a top 10 episode. I don't know that I felt, watching that episode as a kid that he was a great villain, certainly, but was he any greater villain than, Core or, certainly not the Doomsday Machine. The Doomsday Machine seemed far more threatening to Kirk and the Enterprise and the Federation than Khan did. It's funny. I'm surprised that nobody has picked up on that final line from the episode. Obviously, the Wrath of Khan cut short the promise of the final line of Space Seed, where Spock says, "Be nice to go back to that world in 100 years and see what seed, what had sprung from the seed we planted."
It's a shame for a good Scotsman to admit it, but I'm not up on Milton.
The statement Lucifer made when he fell into the pit. It is better to rule in hell than serve in heaven.
Huh.
Would be interesting, Captain, to return to that world in 100 years and learn what crop had sprung from the seed you planted today.
Yes, Mr. Spock. It would indeed.
That in all of the, weird realities that Trek has done, that no one's ever done a story where a Picard era crew found Khan or his descendants on SETI Alpha 5. That I thought could have been a cool story as well. But we would never have gotten Wrath of Khan, which saved the franchise. And
what the irony
impossible.
What the irony of that is? In the earlier script, there is a line that leads into what you could only imagine is Star Trek II. It's not in the script. And Darren actually has the James Blish adaptation he's going to read from. And, those were based on earlier drafts of the script. So this was in an earlier version of Space Seed. And it's amazing how much it unintentionally presages Star Trek II. So, Darren, if you'd be so kind to read that to us.
So I'm going to start at the lower middle of the first page there. It was not all that easy. Before it was over, one of the supermen was dead, and almost everyone else on both sides was considerably banged up. At last, however, the survivors from the Botany Bay were locked in a hold, and Kirk and his officers reassembled in the briefing room. "Well, Mr. Spock," Kirk said, "I think we know now why they left the Earth."
"Yes, sir. To free themselves of the rabble and start fresh. In my opinion, they would never have succeeded even had they made it to a habitable world. The man without... the man
without fear?
Daredevil.
Your scan is cut off here.
The man who cannot know fear is gravely handicapped."
We're about to put that to the test. Have Khan brought in here, please. Khan was brought in, under guard, with Marla behind him. Both looked at Kirk defiantly. "At present," Kirk said, "we are orbiting a planet in a system unknown to you, and which I shall not further identify, conveniently. It is savage and inhospitable, but with breathable atmosphere and land which can be cultivated. You have the following choice: to be put ashore on this world with a minimum of survival equipment, or to be taken to Starbase 12 to be assigned to rehabilitation. The second choice would be rather drastic in your case, but it would enable you to fit into our society. Which do you prefer?" "Captain," Khan said, "I suppose you will remember what Lucifer said when he fell into the pit."
"Shit."
Ashley!
Sorry.
"I remember it well. I take it that's your answer?" "It is." "It may interest you to know that Systems Officer MacGyver's, given the choice of standing court-martial or sharing your exile, has chosen to go with you." Khan looked at her and smiled. "I knew I was right about you," he said. "You have the fire. And think of this, we have what we wanted after all, a world to win." He turned on Kirk. "And, Captain, we will make it an empire. You'll see." "If you do," Kirk said, "you'll have earned it. Guards, beam them down." Khan exited without a backward look, but Marla turned at the door. "Goodbye, Captain," she said. "I'm sorry, but I do love him." "I wish you luck, Lieutenant." After a short silence, Scott said, "It's a shame for a good Scotsman to admit it, but I'm not up on my Milton. What did Lucifer say after he fell into the pit?" "He said, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven." "Mr. Spock, clear for space. I want to get underway as soon as possible."
"Yes, Captain. What shall I do with the Botany Bay?"
You'd better dump it into... No. On second thought, let's keep it in tow. I suppose there are still things aboard her that the historians will want to see. At the moment, though, whenever I say historian, I have to repress a shudder."
"Let us think ahead, then," Spock said. "It would be interesting to come back to this system in 100 years and see what crop had sprung up from the seed we have planted today."
"It would indeed," Kirk said. "But I'll tell you something else, Mr. Spock. I only hope that in 100 years that crop won't have sprung right out of the ground and come out looking for us." Yeah.
So that's wild, right? That is the plot of Star Trek II, right there.
Yeah.
And or it could have been called The Empire Strikes Back, because
that's right.
Khan is building an empire. But it's pretty. That's pretty
Also,
interesting, huh?
I'm pretty sure that Lucifer said, "I'm not dead, but I'm very badly burned."
See, now that's where the joke goes. There you go.
And for a Scotsman to be not up on Milton, he sure understood where that quote was from.
Yeah.
That's
So
why
Scotty's
it's
a
changed in the
liar.
teleplay. That's why it's changed in the teleplay.
It's handled so much better in the teleplay.
Oh my God, so much better in the final tele. And of course, I want to talk about that, Ashley. The original teleplay was written by a journeyman writer who did a lot of freelance work back in the day. In fact, when we talk about Cary Wilbur, he had pretty much done the same script for Captain Video.
right,
in which a bunch of Greeks wake up after being in cryogenic freeze, and they now have mythological powers. And it's
but
very
no one
similar.
could understand any of their signs.
It was Michael.
It's
Forrest.
all Greek to them.
And
Yes,
so what can you tell us, Ashley, about Carrie Wilbur and sort of the evolution of the script? Because remember, this was an early original series episode. So when he was writing his drafts, it was before the show had even aired. So that's another reason why a lot of this may be so McClunky.
Oh my God. Well, first of all, what you have to understand about that era of television is that it's not the one that three people in this podcast grew up in. You know, it wasn't really an era where you had just a bunch of people who were on staff. Freelancing was a thing. And as you said, you know, Carrie Wilbur was writing outside of the context of having seen an actual show, which is a challenge both for the writer who's trying to do that script, although I would imagine that it's also kind of liberating because who cares? But it becomes a challenge in the revision process, because now you've got a script and you need to rewrite it if you're Gene Kuhn or whoever is doing that rewrite, and ask yourself, okay, so I know what this show has become. How do I now adapt this thing that felt right at the time and turn it into something else? So you're not quite starting from zero, but you are starting with a bit of a conundrum. You know, Khan in the original version of the script, he wasn't Khan. You know, he was a freaking Viking man. Oh, well, he wasn't like he didn't come from the land of the ice and snow with a midnight sun. Although that would have been fantastic. He was Erickson. Strangely, I don't think Star Trek Into Darkness would have had quite the same like tagline as "Who are you?" Erickson.
Harold Erickson.
Harold Erickson. Harold Erickson sounds like the guy who is like up on the third floor processing the TPS reports. You know what I'm saying? P.S. I want to see the episode where Kirk has to battle that guy.
Yeah.
Well,
I have 10 times your strength, Captain Kirk.
The funny thing is that he then became John Erickson, but
Right.
that was, you know, much like he does in the episode where he's not letting on who he really is. He really was Ragnar Thorwald. It's like,
yeah, that was my dog's name.
Thorwald Ragnarok.
He really was Benedict Cumberbatch.
Rubber baby buggy bumpers. It's what he really was.
I don't know if you guys saw Cumberbatch a couple of years ago when he got his star on the Walk of Fame, and Kevin Feige was giving a speech, and he said to Cumberbatch, you know, you were an amazing Hamlet, you were a wonderful Sherlock, you were the second best Khan.
That's hilarious.
That's really funny. Well, you know, speaking of second best Khans, you know, one of the things that was the impetus for this episode to talk about the enduring appeal of this character is because, you know, Paramount just made the announcement that this long-aborting podcast, audio podcast that they're going to do of Khan is going to star Naveen Andrews as Khan, which is an interesting choice. I think a good choice at that. Naveen Andrews, most people remember, not only was terrific in Lost, but he was really wonderful in the miniseries about Elizabeth Holmes and what was it called? I forget what it was called. Theranos, which he was terrific in that. So interesting choice. And then oh my God, what's her name? From For All Mankind, Ren Schmidt is going to play Marlon McGivers.
Ragnar Thorvald.
and which is a really interesting choice as well, because of course, you know, MacGyver's is a character that was sort of underserved in Space Seed. You know, she sort of gets won over to the cause very quickly and is willing to basically betray the whole ship because she thinks, you know, Khan is hot.
To be honest, 60s women were like that, Mark.
Yeah,
but,
it was a different time.
But you know, and I, you know, I remember a lot of people, you know, a lot of different stories about why Marlon McGivers is in Star Trek 2, because, a lot of people said, oh, the actress, who played her, was she ill at the time? Because eventually she did get ill, but she wasn't. She was in a Fantasy Island with Ricardo Montalban in '82. Right. It was, as Nick has said, he said it's a revenge story. It's Moby Dick. Yeah. I needed her to be dead, so he'd want revenge.
Right. So it's not like a story where Khan is wildly inconvenienced for right. A decade. And he's like, you know what? Screw Kirk. We've been living in a desert and everything else is fine.
Then he's just Sam Kinison. It's a desert.
Nothing lives here. There's no water. Damn it, Kirk.
It's in Space Heat, it is such a compelling character, and obviously it's not just Gene Kuhn, but Gene Roddenberry, who did some uncredited work on that script as well. Why do you think that, Mike, that Space Heat is so enduring, and that the character of Khan, continues to be one that absolutely fascinates people? Obviously, and we've talked about this on the show, it's the villain that everybody wants to see. In movies, who's our Khan? Nero's our Khan. Well, not really. Tom Hardy is our Khan. No, it's like Cruge is our Khan. No way. So, what is it about Khan that just like he is the Rosetta Stone, the touchstone of Star Trek? Everybody's just like, Khan is this defining character.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. In some ways, that pursuit of Khan has been like the bane of the film franchise. For all the reasons you lay out there. It's funny to me how, like, Khan in Wrath of Khan should not have worked, right? Because it was an episode that even, I think, for many of the fans, yeah, it was a good episode, but it would, I think, I don't know if there's any research or empirical evidence to back this up, but I don't know that Space Heat, appeared on even any like top 10 or even top 20 lists of, fan favorite episodes prior to 1982. Maybe it did. Yeah, and ever since the movies have been chasing that. And what was surprising to me how it worked is you didn't have to have seen Space Heat to get the show or for it to affect you. It didn't even matter. You got a little of encapsulation about what happened and who he was, and you're off to the races. I wonder, is there a universe where that movie could have been made where Space Seed never existed? Where you just bring in a character who's got a history with your lead, and you don't really need to know much of anything about it, except that this antagonist, his wife is dead and he's really pissed off and he's now coming after our heroes. Right. It's just remarkable to me that it works, without the audience really needing to know much of anything about Space Seed aside from what they're given in the film. A lot of that, you got to chalk that up to Nick Meyer, his direction, his writing. He just sold it. But what a very difficult thing. I think if you even pitch that, and I think it has been pitched. How many times have writers tried to bring back villains from previous Star Trek episodes and different series and gotten a reaction from, executives? Well, who's going to remember that character?
Right.
Who would, nobody, the audience isn't going to watch that episode before they see the movie. The movie's not going to work. So we can't do that.
The problem is, I think that, with those, well, let's frame it differently. What makes Khan special is that it was framed in the context of the film as a very personal conflict, where you have a character who represents a force that the audience believes is Kirk's match, especially under the circumstances. So a lot of those things have to line up and they have to add up. Like, I wouldn't even know where to begin telling you who that dude is in the Next Generation. And I think that's why, they default to the Borg in First Contact, or they're trying to invent it in some of the other films, but you just can't. And, I think that when the studio lays down a mandate, so, there were two weird mandates that were kind of happening, in early versions of Beyond, which were, number one, we need a Khan, Jesus. And number two, we need it to be Earth. Like those are the two things that Paramount was convinced of, that the movies only worked when Earth was under threat and there was a Khan, which, if you really think about it, is kind of a silly set of expectations. But what they meant by a Khan was they just meant a villain who really worked. I don't know that they understood what made Khan work. And I think that was just a lot of things had to be lined up exactly right. It was Ricardo Montalban. Yeah. It was the nature of the threat. It was how personal the story became. It was the fact that it could be so simple and elemental and be so easily explained, other than trying to explain how the Chekhov missed an entire planet. But
no, I think that's it's a great point. And, you know, it's interesting because Don Granger was the executive on the Star Trek movies back when a lot of those films were in development, particularly the Next Generation movies. And then he ended up going over to Skydance. So it's not surprising that logic, which was so important to Jonathan Dolgen, who ran the studio at the time too, Earth and We Need Our Khan, carried over to the Skydance movies. And I love, you know, sort of the way that you and Zach were going to bring Khan back in your pitch for Star Trek, which was really cool and would have been interesting.
What?
Oh,
let's hear that.
So the end of the movie that we wanted to do with Bob, when he was still part of that, like, and everybody's like, wow, that's freaking great.
This would have been the second movie with Chris Pine as Captain Kirk, right?
This would have been the end of movie 3. So
movie
the
3.
very end of movie
yeah,
3
Beyond. What
would have
became
been Kirk has essentially decided that he needs to, because of a lot of things that happen in the movie, he's decided he needs to get his crap together.
Mm-hmm.
And so the crew is kind of split up, but we go back to Earth. And Earth is under attack by the Klingons. And, you know, planetary defenses are utterly destroyed, like Starfleet Command, they're rushing around, things are exploding, it's all the blown up consoles, all of that other crap. A Klingon strike force beams down into Starfleet Command. A Klingon, like, you know, walks up, you know, to the admiral, who's like the whoever the hell the chief of staff is, and he says, you know, there's an old Klingon proverb. You know, it's like revenge is a dish that is best served cold.
Do you know the Klingon proverb that tells us revenge is a dish that is best served cold?
And then he pulls off his mask, and it's Khan, and he says, it's very cold in space. And then you're out.
And that's all you had.
That was basically going to be the setup for the next movie. So you sort of basically do Khan right in that universe.
Right.
Which is great, because then you have a whole movie where Khan isn't in, and then he shows up in the denouement to tee up the next movie. Imagine that, thinking ahead.
I know, weird, right?
So I want to respond to something Mike said earlier, because it's something I intimated as well. I've referred to this book as one of our Bibles in the past. This, of course, is the Best of Trek, which is an anthology book that combined, supposedly there was a magazine called Trek, although I never actually saw it anywhere. Although they do have an ad for it in the back to subscribe. But I looked for it, believe me, at conventions and newsstands and stuff. So the only thing I ever got were these books. But anyway, so this book was published in, let's see what the copyright on this is. It's first edition.
Late 70s?
1974. 1978. Sorry, 1978. So this is a poll of Star Trek fans, top 10 episodes. So the point Mike, and I think by extension we were making, is that Space Seed, which is now considered one of the great episodes of Star Trek, it often shows up as high as number 2 or 3. And I believe in one of the guides to the greatest 100 episodes of television, Space Seed was on it, and not just Star Trek, but episodes in general. So this is the list. Number 1, City on the Edge of Forever. Number 2, Amok Time. Number 3, Journey to Babel. Number 4, The Menagerie. Hey, this is a lot like my list. Number 5, The Trouble with Tribbles. Number 6, Shore Leave. Number 7, Balance of Terror. Number 8, The Enemy Within. Number 9, The Naked Time. And number 10, Mirror, Mirror. There is no
not even
Space Seed on that list.
Except Shore Leave is on that list. And look, that's fine, but it's not top 10.
Okay. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I want to read you who is your favorite villain, because this may be even more illuminating.
Okay.
The leading vote getter was the inimitable Leo Walsh. Yes, Harcourt Fenton Mudd got a solid 25% of the votes cast. A surprising second place was Mark Leonard's, or as Ashley knows him, Mark Leonard, superb portrayal of the Romulan commander in Balance of Terror with 14%. Number 3, Squire Trelane of Gothos came in third, followed by 2 Klingon baddies, Kor with number 9% and Kang with 77%. The remaining 34% of the vote was just about equally divided between, this is crazy,
Ambassador Robert Fox,
the Horda, the Keeper, Koloth, Theleb, Dr. Simon Adams from Dagger of the Mind,
and Kevin Riley,
Khan, and the Romulans and Klingons in general.
It's Tristan Adams, but that's okay.
Oh,
Barely
okay,
made the
what did I
list.
say? Oh, yeah, it says Simon Adams. Yeah,
Yeah, they're wrong.
It's Maud Adams, actually.
Isn't that interesting?
I had that very issue of the Best of Trek, which was probably more than 10 years old by the time I got my hands on it. But I remember those polls. I think that's probably what I was thinking of. It's remarkable. I mean, hats off to Harv Bennett for recognizing something that Star Trek fans at the time probably didn't.
They didn't know
how much juice there was left to wring out of that character and that storyline.
I'm glad you say that. Let me ask Darren. You might remember too, Mike. I know this is not really a question for Ashley. Do you remember, Darren, when you found out in 81 that the villain of Star Trek II was going to be Khan Noonian Singh? What your response was?
Yeah. I thought, oh, this could be cool. I remember Khan. That was basically it.
I thought it was bizarre.
No.
I was surprised.
I was too. I vaguely remember being surprised because I was also a big fan of Fantasy Island, which I watched every week.
Right.
Yes.
And there was like, well, wait a minute. That's an interesting episode where Mr. Rourke shows up on the Enterprise and presents a vacation scenario.
But I would totally watch
that. Was Ashley's
movie.
other pitch for Star Trek 3.
Yeah, because he was so bored, as captain of the Enterprise.
Smiles, everyone, smiles. I will avenge you.
He needed Mr. Rourke to come and cheer him up. Yeah.
Tattoo. I will avenge you.
It's interesting in Carrie Wilbur's original pitch that this character of, well, we'll call him Khan, but he was still John Erickson, was not a eugenically enhanced Superman. He was just a criminal that had been exiled in outer space and would eventually become kind of a space pirate, which was very different from what it ultimately became as a result.
He was the outrageous O'Connor.
Oh,
he
no,
was the outrageous O'Connor. Yeah.
He was
Can you imagine that? The Wrath of O'Connor?
Well, that's the Wrath of O'Connor. I see.
Oh, see now that's Picard season 4.
Yeah.
No, somebody get the lower decks guys on the line.
Well, it would have been better than any one of the Next Generation movies, actually.
What's interesting also, I for those of you who've seen the Roddenberry Vault or read these early drafts, Barbara Baldwin, who was Joe DaGusta's wife, now ex-wife, who was in the so many episodes, was in a scene playing Lieutenant Baker, who was a friend of Marla MacGyver's.
Right.
And they talked about her obsession with Khan.
Well, she's not his ex-wife. She's passed away, actually.
Well, I know, but they were ex. She was ex before she passed away.
Right.
So, but she was in a bunch, Shore Leave and Balance of Terror. She was constantly showing up in Star Trek, and she was in
constantly
Space
seen with a new crewman.
Yes, exactly. She got around. She was She was the real T.J. Hooker.
See, no.
No, too soon. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're familiar with the timeline of Star Trek movies in the universe of For All Mankind, I presume. Is that correct? You guys?
Yes, but why don't you share that with us, because it's so fascinating.
Well, all I can recall is that I think there was an interview with Ron Moore or one of the producers talking about how in their imagined reality, where obviously the space program did not stop with the end of the Apollo missions, just kept going on for forever. And the U.S. and Russia, the Soviet Union, proceeded into space and to Mars and beyond. That Star Trek, of course, still existed in the '60s, and the question in the world of the show was, what happened to it after that? And if I can recall, I might be recalling incorrectly, but I think Star Trek Phase 2, the unproduced series, did actually happen in
that's correct. And in fact, that was a huge impetus for us to decide to do our Phase 2 panel at Vegas this year.
Right. Okay. So I think that's cool and very interesting. But I think also Star Trek the Motion Picture and Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, in that reality also existed. Is that correct?
No, Motion Picture didn't, but Star Trek II did. Because there's an episode where they actually go to see Star Trek II.
Right. But there must have been a Star Trek.
There must have been a first movie.
No, because Phase 2 was considered. Because they went to go see Wrath of Khan. It wasn't called Star Trek II.
Oh, there you go. Kind of like it was originally just called Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan.
I think it still is if you look at the.
Yes,
look at certain 70-millimeter prints. Yes,
but look at also how Roddenberry, called things, because Phase 2 was Star Trek II. He called Star Trek II. Then Motion Picture, he called when he was doing his JFK script for Star Trek II, he called it Star Trek III. That's why people get confused when they look at these scripts, because
my point was where I think For All Mankind got it wrong. Why I think their timeline, this parallel universe timeline, doesn't quite track, is that Roddenberry would have never made Wrath of Khan.
That's true.
Correct.
And I think in the universe where Star Trek was brought back as a television series in the late 70s and was successful and was then spun off into feature films, Gene Roddenberry would presumably have not been kicked off the franchise.
Right.
Particularly if Wrath of Khan was his first movie as producer instead of Star Trek the Motion Picture, but he would not have made that movie. Now I know there were a lot of memos and everything kicking around at the time. Obviously he was being, relegated. He was being kicked upstairs basically as a executive consultant.
He was being made an admiral.
And don't let them take you off that bridge. And I think was very resistant to whatever it was that Bennett or whoever was going to come in and going to come up with their own ideas. But and I think he later said after the movie was a big success that they owed it all to Montalban, who was so good. He somehow was a counterbalance to the fact that the story wasn't all that great or interesting or wasn't very Star Trek in its origin. Now, I think that is I could be remembering incorrectly, but I feel like there was a lot of sour grapes there, which I completely understand where Roddenberry was coming from at the time. But anyway, long-winded way of saying, I think For All Mankind, as great as that show is, got it wrong.
No, that's an interesting point. And you'll have to discuss that with Ron Moore in Vegas this August.
Right.
Tell him he messed up, screwed up.
And ask him
I'm
more
laughing
about
at the superior intellect.
Ask him more about the killed Star Wars TV show that he worked.
Underworld.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. It's so interesting because here, what it must have been like for Ricardo Montalban. Here he plays one of a million roles that he plays in the 60s as a working actor who's going from movies to television, episode after episode after episode. And then to get a call in 81, say, we want you to reprise this role you played 20 years earlier. And he's in the amazing success of Fantasy Island. Yeah. So that also is very ballsy of Hart Bennett to say, not only we're going to do a sequel to this episode of Star Trek from the second season of the TV show, And this comes on the heels of like the motion picture where they're like initially when they were developing like Planet of Titans, they're like, I don't even know if we can use the cast of the TV series. Maybe it should be Robert Redford. Maybe we should cast big stars in these roles, right? So now they're saying, let's cast a guy from the TV show as our villain. And, you know, people look at him and he's this delightful character in Fantasy Island every week. It's such a bizarre choice in retrospect. Obviously one that worked out enormously well. And then to hear the stories about how difficult it was for Ricardo to make the transition back to Khan, because he's so used to doing the rich Corinthian leather commercials. He's doing he's doing Fantasy Island, and you know how over the top he was. You know, and Nick loves to tell that story about it. He said, you know, never show anyone your top because then you have nowhere else to go. And Ricardo famously said, you're going to direct me. I need direction. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And
but he was smart enough to ask to see the original episode again, just so that he could put it in his mind who this character was, at least in that time, and be able to extrapolate from there.
Although it's a very different performance, isn't it?
Totally different.
Yeah. He looked different. I do remember seeing any skepticism as a kid that I would have had. I do remember seeing that like first publicity image. I think it was Khan. I'm sure you've all seen it, flanked by the two.
Khan's pets.
Yeah, Khan's pets. Yeah.
Right. Yes, exactly. And with the crazy long mane of hair and the chest and the Mad Max.
He was Whitesnake before there was a Whitesnake.
He totally
comes
was.
back
But
as
I
a
was
lion.
like, okay, this could work. This has caught my attention.
When I saw that picture, I think it was in Time magazine. I'm like, this is going to be great.
Yeah.
It's like, this is going to be great. And it was like so cool. And then, you know, getting the press kit, you know, and then you knew they weren't trying to hide the movie because, you know, they did the sneak preview a week early, you know, in theaters, like a week before it opened back in the days when they used to do sneak previews. I'm not talking about test screening, sneak previews.
Yeah.
And I had a few friends who went into Manhattan to see it. I couldn't get my parents to let me go. I was so angry because in high school that week they had seen it. And to their credit, they didn't tell me anything, unlike the idiot who told me Darth Vader was Luke's father in middle school. But these guys were good. They didn't tell me, but they did tell me they loved the movie. They said Kirk's really smart in it. I remember them telling me, they said, "Oh, you're really going to like it. Kirk's really smart." And I'm like, "Oh, that's cool."
He guesses really cool. Khan's ATM password. That's how smart.
Right. And
well, I got to see it early too. I won tickets over the radio.
Wow.
A local radio show had, so there was a television show, I think it was called PM Magazine.
Yeah.
Kind of Entertainment Tonight. And this was in Tampa. And they had a Star Trek trivia question that they threw out to anybody. And it was like the third or fourth caller was some bizarre, you know, you had to know the right answer too.
You don't remember the question, do you?
No, I do remember the question.
Oh.
You know, what is the significance of the number SC9370176CEC? And yes, I know that because of BluSky on the SNL skit, which I'd seen 100 times.
That's funny.
Having played it, because I didn't have a VHS at the cassette recorder at the time, I only had audio tape, and I remember listening to it over and over. Of course, I called, said it's Captain Kirk's serial number, and I won tickets for me and my brother. So we saw it a couple nights before everybody else did.
Nice.
I remember where we were in the theater. I remember the music blasting when the Reliant first appeared. It was one of the great movie-going experiences ever. And of course, you know, everybody was in tears when, spoiler alert, Spock died.
Spoiler alert, Spock. That's what they called him back at the Academy.
The first movie I ever saw back to back, where I stayed for a second time, was Flash Gordon in 1980. The second movie was Star Trek II, where it's like, I don't remember how I must have, you know, because there's no way I would have been able to get into the next screening because it would have been sold out. So I must have hid out in the theater and went to see it a second time. And that was the time I recorded it on cassette.
In the theater. Wow.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Because well, you know, some things never change. So you know, it's interesting because of course it wouldn't be long before Khan would return, opening a restaurant.
Yes.
The restaurant Enterprise.
Oh my God!
Was a beloved skit on Saturday Night Live.
Don't call it a skit. They're sketches. They don't
Excuse me, I
like you
stand
calling it a
corrected.
skit.
I hate that word.
Loved it. Of course,
he tasks me.
Of course, Shatner was hosting that week, and it's the same week that they did the Get a Life sketch, and it's great. Dana Carvey comes in as Ricardo Montalban's Khan, and
but that was not his real chest,
right?
But
John
wasn't he
John
working
Lovitz
for,
is
he was an inspector, wasn't he?
Is the what?
Wasn't Khan an inspector for working with the inspector?
Well, he had with him a health inspector,
right?
And that was John Lovitz, and it's so hilarious. And of course, I believe who was Spock? It was the tall, dark-haired guy.
Was it Phil Hartman?
Kevin Nealon.
Oh, Kevin Nealon.
Kevin Nealon was Spock, and Phil Hartman was McCoy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and one of the patrons was choking on a sandwich, and he says, "Bones, help her." He says, "I'm a doctor, not a." Oh. It's great.
No paper towels. The employee washroom. Dirty silverware stored next to clean. No sneeze guard on the salad bar. I have dreamed of this moment, Karg, for 25 years.
He's got us, Jim. Maybe, maybe not. I have a plan. Bones, do you have any money on you? A little, but why? Give it to me. Bones, Spot. I failed to see the logic behind your plan, Captain. You're absolutely right, Khan. About these violations, I want to thank both of you for bringing them to our attention. Rest assured that they will be corrected immediately.
Well, I should report these violations of your restaurant, Captain, but since this is your first offense and you're going to correct them, I think we can overlook this.
Oh, so you have won this round, Karg. Karg, I will be back in 3 months' time, Karg. And you will be cited.
And then that was the last we ever saw of Khan. No, it actually wasn't. He returns in Into Darkness, and we talked about this originally. They were very close to casting Benicio del Toro, who would have been great. And
give me the starship, you motherfucker.
And that didn't work out, so they cast Benedict Cumberbatch as Khan.
I wish that had been more clever. I wish they had played with it a little bit. Maybe it wasn't Khan. Maybe it was one of the other Supermen masquerading as Khan.
Superman.
Yes, but just having him, so physically wrong for an established character that was supposedly around before the rift in the timelines. It's just odd, and it just doesn't work.
They were so anxious to do it, but just because you can do a thing doesn't mean you should do a thing.
My ship was found adrift. I alone was revived.
I looked up John Harrison. Until a year ago, he didn't exist.
John Harrison was a fiction created the moment I was awoken by your Admiral Marcus to help him advance his cause.
A smoke screen to conceal my true identity. My name is Khan.
And it was so interesting because it was everyone knew, but they were still trying to pass off this John Harrison thing.
Yeah.
And I remember I was at the mix for the IMAX. I was there with JJ and Berkey and Bill and Ben Burt and a couple other people. And at one point during the mix, they starts referring to John Harrison as Khan, right? Which was no surprise to me. But so when it's over, I'm driving off the lot and I get this panic call. It's like, you heard something you weren't supposed to hear. I'm like, what? That John Harrison is Khan? Because you can't tell anyone. I said, I'm not going to tell anyone. Don't worry. I'm not going to tell. I said, I knew. What do you mean you knew?
Everybody knew.
Like we're subtly hinting because of Harrison. You know what that's a reference to. And it's like, I get it. It's like, I'm not going to tell anyone. Don't worry. Okay, just don't tell anyone. Because I could get in a lot of trouble. It's like, no, I'm not going to say anything. It's like
the Harrison reference is obviously because Benedict Cumberbatch was playing Han Solo.
But it's interesting because until it becomes Star Trek II karaoke, as I think Ashley wisely called it, there are good moments in Darkness. There are scenes that I like quite a bit.
Well, it makes you. It reminds you of better scenes in other movies.
Well, I mean, some of those scenes are like legit good even on their own. I mean, I think the scene where the moment, I thought that maybe this movie was going to turn into something that was, wow, okay, did not see this coming, was Kirk and Khan saying, hey, what if we team up against Peter Weller?
Captain, I strongly object. To what? I haven't said anything yet. Since we cannot take the ship from the outside, the only way we can take it is from within. And as a large boarding party would be detected, it is optimal for you to take as few members of the crew as possible. You will meet resistance, requiring personnel with advanced combat abilities and innate knowledge of that ship. This indicates that you plan to align with Khan, the very man we were sent here to destroy.
I'm not aligning with him, I'm using him. The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
An Arabic proverb attributed to a prince who was betrayed and decapitated by his own subjects.
Still, it's a hell of a quote.
The minute we get to the bridge, drop him.
Well, stun him, Khan. I thought he was helping us.
I'm pretty sure we're helping him.
Like, what if we go get that fucking guy? I thought, okay, that's fascinating. But yeah, you're right, Mark. You're right.
Yeah, it's interesting because even when they showed this is the right after Dark Knight Returns, and I mean Dark Knight, where they had the IMAX preview. So they did the IMAX where they showed the first 15 minutes. At that point, the terrorist incident on Earth was still before where Kirk goes to the planet and has the fight with and they have to run from the natives to the ship.
Right,
and
which is a
someone at some point
change. Yeah.
said, "Oh, we got to swap these two scenes," and that was a great decision. Like that was I don't know how. I mean, honestly, I'm mad at myself when I was watching it, not thinking that it was so obvious that those two scenes should be flopped, and they did. And that was a really smart decision because the opening actually works pretty well on the fact that the Enterprise is hiding
underwater.
Yeah. But it has a nice little feel of an original Star Trek episode, particularly when they start sketching out, they see the Enterprise and start sketching out the Enterprise. But it's so, but then the whole thing where he rescues Spock from the exploding volcano.
Yeah, exactly.
But you
anyway,
talk about what you love on this show, right? I mean,
yeah.
Thanks.
I mean, that's about as close as I think we get to talking about how much we love Into Darkness.
It was a very cool shot when the Enterprise came out of the water.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Khan was sort of the best and the worst thing I think ever to happen to the franchise, or at least the movie.
Agreed. Yeah.
Because we're forever going to be chasing it, and I've it's discussed in detail. There was so much happenstance and luck involved in that film being the classic that it is.
Yeah.
And I think whether you're reincarnating Khan literally and bringing him back, or trying to find another character who fills the same niche. I mean, I totally understand. If indeed it was true that Roddenberry felt that Khan was the wrong villain for a Star Trek movie, and it wasn't just him pushing back at, whatever idea his successor came up with, I can see that. There aren't a lot of there's not a lot of Star Trek the Motion Picture and Star Trek II, and I guess that was sort of the point. There wasn't a lot of exploration.
Well, there's enough visual effects shots and sets that they would not have been able to make the movie without them.
Yeah,
completely.
I don't think there's any idea that Harv Bennett could have come up with that Gene would have liked at that point.
Yeah, that's true.
Great.
I just don't think he had been replaced. And, the advantage Star Trek II had was it didn't have the kind of pressure on it because they were spending so little money and the expectations were so low that you know, they could take these kind of risks. I mean, the biggest pushback they got was when, you know, Nick wanted to call it the Undiscovered Country, and they said, that's not happening.
Right.
You know, that's not happening. Come up with something else. Vengeance of Khan? Okay. Maybe not. So, you know, it's so interesting. And then, you know, obviously you start to see, because it was, you know, Gene was upset about Star Trek 4. And then, you know, when it was a big success, he says, oh, yeah, because, you know, I pitched him a time travel story,
right.
You know, which was dark and nihilistic and nothing like charming like Star Trek 4. But
when they had to, like, go back in
to
time and find JFK and bring him to the future and drop him in the ocean so he would sing to the giant probe.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that would have been great. Him and Bobby, just...
Yeah.
So, you know, obviously Khan continues to be used something that's like a little bit of fan service to try and get, you know, a response out of the audience, whether it's, you know, seeing Khan Noonian, the Khan project on in Picard season 2 was I don't know what, you know, was kind of like, oh yeah, we're going to give the audience I don't know what that was all about.
It's an Easter egg.
And then, you know, obviously having Muppet Baby Khan in Strange New Worlds, but of course there's this character unfathomably who's related to Khan in Strange New Worlds. Noonian, what's her name?
Lon Noonian Singh. Which
Noonian
I
Singh.
swear to God, I love her so much. But Jesus H. Christ, really?
But okay, but I'm using this not to criticize, but to tee up to what I think Enterprise did that was so interesting. We'll let Mike talk about that. Is the idea of these genetically enhanced Supermen, the Augments as they were called, in a three episode arc that you did in the 4th season, which, you know, so much of the 4th season episodes were tied into things from the original series under the aegis of Manny Coto, who was pretty much show running the show at that point. So that was interesting because it was taking the Khan mythology and the eugenics wars mythology, but not doing Khan again. So I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about how that came to be and, you know, the execution of that arc on Enterprise.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, Manny obviously, as you all know, was a huge fan of the original series and really wanted to dive into the mythology of the original series, as we were. Enterprise was a prequel to that show. And some of those story ideas had, you know, I guess some of the more obvious prequel-y ideas had just not been done. And so he was very eager to do something involving not necessarily Khan, because we didn't want to, you know, touch that third rail. But there was certainly a lot of story to get out of the idea of genetically engineered humans. And so I think the very first arc that he wanted to do was going to be this 3-parter that suggested that there were, you know, hundreds more genetically enhanced embryos out there, and that we'd meet this new character who, because Rick Berman had told us Brent Spiner was interested in appearing on the show, we then tied into one of the ancestors of Data's creator. He was one of the various Sungs. I'm not even sure how many Sungs there have been at this point. But Arik Sung was the character on Enterprise, and I thought, a really wonderful idea to explore the scientists and these characters who felt that they had not gotten their day, and to really, you know, dive into the themes that you could explore with the idea of these characters who were genetically enhanced, and why it makes sense to, you know, in a very Star Trek sort of way, explore that part of humanity, that it was a very short-sighted thing again, in the universe of Star Trek, to sort of cut off this type of research, and that look at all of the good that genetic engineering could bring. And so it was a way to make these antagonists very understandable and relatable, and honestly kind of made the future Federation's idea of banning all genetic experimentation seem a little bit reactionary and perhaps not very smart and not very forward thinking. And the franchise,
it seems very Star Trekian, doesn't it?
Yeah,
the
it feels
idea of
very
banning any kind of scientific research.
Absolutely, and particularly the kind that could, extend lives and relieve pain and suffering. So it for us, it made our antagonist, led by, Brent Spiner's character, and the other. We came up with the phrase augments because we thought, Superman was probably trademarked by Warner Brothers. I don't love the word, but it kind of, fulfilled the purpose.
And it's caught because now when people refer to Space Seed, they talk about Khan and his augments, which is weird.
Right. It is. I don't disagree with that, but we had to come up with something, and that wasn't my call. But it was, I don't know, it was a very rich area, and it led not only into that three-parter, but a subsequent two-parter, because at the end of the three-parter, again, spoiler alert, if any of your listeners haven't seen it, there's a Klingon bird of prey. Basically the augments, the supermen and women, were trying to spark a war between Earth and the Klingon Empire so they could kind of go off and do their own thing, and humanity wouldn't pursue them. And when that failed, there was a bird of prey that had the remaining 100-year-old embryos from the time of the eugenics wars, with all of Khan's brethren and children, so to speak, on board that ship. And I wrote that final third episode where the Klingon bird of prey explodes and all the embryos are destroyed. And then I saw the finished episode where the bird of prey just sort of like its neck just kind of like snapped in half and it just kind of limped along. And I was like, and I went to Manny and I was like, it was a cool shot, but I was like, the whole point, we just did 3 episodes about how important it was to destroy those embryos. And it seems like they're probably still aboard that ship. And he was like, well, wait a minute. What if they are still on board that ship? And then we developed another 2-story arc out of that, which I think in many ways was even better than that initial 3-episode arc, because that 3-episode arc kicked off with these augmented humans kicking ass on a Klingon ship, killing a bunch of Klingons and taking over the ship. Now, our thinking process was, and this was Manny going off of, just my disappointment in the visual effects department, Manny saying, well, wait a minute, the Klingons just got their asses handed to them by a bunch of genetically enhanced humans. Wouldn't they then want to develop genetically enhanced Klingons? And we just established that ship is still out there with those embryos. What would they do with that? Anyway, we got a really wonderful 2-part story out of that concept. So, and, there was only one point even where Khan was even referenced in, I wrote the 3rd episode in the 3rd parter, and it came up naturally in the discussion. And what we decided was that Khan was a bit of a, nobody knows what happened to him. He left on the Botany Bay and he just kind of disappeared and he ran away. And the other augments didn't even look up to him all that much. He seemed like someone who had fled.
He fled. Why? Was he afraid?
That's right. And we left it there. We left it there. And we also left the 20th century explanation for the augments in place. We didn't want to tamper with that and retcon that. But I think there's a lot to do with augments without going back to Khan. I think it's a rich area.
It's interesting. In Greg Cox's Khan trilogy, where he gives a bit of the origin story for Khan, and has him dealing with Gary Seven and all sorts of other characters from the history of TOS. The framing device is the Enterprise crew is visiting this planet that does nothing but genetic experimentation and augmentation. And the Klingons are there to vie for this technology because the Klingon Empire embraces genetic experimentation, as we've seen in the various types of Klingons that are around. And it's really a fascinating sort of way of comparing the Federation's attitude toward it and the Klingons.
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, I was playing Rob there.
Rob today.
There's actually a regular character. I mean, not
regular.
Khan Noonian Singh. He's very irregular. I mean, but there's a regular character in one of the series who is a genetically engineered Superman, and it turns into a big thing for him. We find out at one point that Dr. Bashir was they messed with his genes. Why? Because if they hadn't,
his genes wouldn't fit.
His genes wouldn't fit. They had to make his genes fit. But I mean, that became a big deal. And I think that DS9 kind of wrestled with what does that look like? Why does that ban exist? What does that mean? And what are you trading off when you're saying that you can't genetically engineer, a genetic challenge out of a child, right? I mean, you're a parent, you want the best for your children, you make a decision that wildly violates the law, but why does that law exist in the first place?
Yeah.
And I think that's just a really fascinating discussion. And it's easy to say, well, it's anti-Star Trekian to say that, well, let's just ban that and let's not do that. And that might be true. Look, I don't like it when my science fiction comes down to, and by the way, science is dangerous and bad. I'm not a fan of that at all. But by the same token, there's lots of technology that we put guardrails on.
Yeah.
Right? We don't let people build nuclear bombs in their basement. There's all kinds of.
That was just that one time. I didn't do it again.
Yeah, I know. It was glorious, dude. I loved it. I couldn't believe you did it. I was so proud of you.
Little Manhattan Project.
But as you think about like the implications of it, and in a way, like Khan is sort of the cautionary tale. In a way, it's actually maybe Khan might not be the cautionary tale. He's sort of the Baroque version of that, where it's not just about you're creating this genetically engineered Superman. It turns into a real question that is buried in the name of the war that he was in the middle of in the first place.
Right.
Eugenics, right? Eugenics is not an idea that began with, Star Trek in Space Seed, right? You're talking about like, what's her name? Margaret Sanger or whatever, like Planned Parenthood, who started it specifically.
But it's also 20 years after World War II when this is written. It's 66.
Right.
So,
Well,
dealing with, Nazis, but as well in America, eugenics was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just want to bring something up that came up in our Discord server that you should check in the show notes and join. Everyone kept referring to Khan as this master tactician, right? That he was brilliant and he was unstoppable. That's not true at all. Khan failed at pretty much everything he attempted because he hadn't integrated his intellect with his emotions. He's the opposite of Spock. So he could not, make those work together, and he always sabotaged himself. Always sabotaged himself because of his hubris. And that's why Khan lost every time, and that's the lesson that we need to learn from that.
But he had a great
Except I don't
fashion
think he
sense.
lost every time. Look, Khan is pretty much winning that movie. And
he's not. He destroys himself for no good reason.
No. Work with me here for a second.
Okay,
He is winning that movie up until a very particular point, right? He lures Kirk in. He disables the Enterprise. He knows exactly where to hit us. He set up a trap that basically left Kirk buried alive in the center of a dead planet.
Right.
Exactly. He does all of this, and he has won this thing. And the only reason why the movie works out
because he
the way
didn't
that it
listen
does-
to Joachim.
No, it is because, and this is the thing, this is what bothers me about that interpretation. I think Discord is effing wrong, is that it undermines and it undercuts what Kirk does that is very smart. Kirk has learned a lesson. He went in, he got caught with his pants down, and he stopped underestimating his opponent. He does something very smart. Hours would seem like days, and that is the most critically important strategic decision in the whole story. And it's the one thing that Khan wouldn't have foreseen. What happens at the end is when Khan's rage overwhelms his ability to make a good decision, but it's not a strategic decision that it overwhelms.
It's the point
it's a
where
tactical
Khan,
decision.
It's
like,
the point where
please,
Khan
draw,
decides
officer.
to go into the Mutara Nebula.
Exactly. That's
He gets
the moment
goaded.
when
He gets
loses
goaded
it.
in.
Yeah,
Because
Kirk
he is
knows his personality and he knows which buttons to push.
You have proved your superior intellect and defeated the plans of Admiral Kirk. You do not need to defeat him again.
He tasks me. He tasks me, and I shall have him. I'll chase him round the moons of Nibia and round the Antares maelstrom and round perdition's flames before I give him up. Prepare to alter course.
Exactly. But that's why the movie works, because Khan and Kirk are evenly matched. But Kirk learns something very important about Khan, right? He comes to realize this thing about Khan and he uses it against him, which is what Kirk does, which is what makes Kirk great. If Khan isn't great and Khan isn't smart and Khan isn't a worthy adversary, then Kirk isn't all that impressive.
You know who doesn't know what buttons to push? Sulu. Man,
damn right he
the
doesn't.
ships get jostled and
Chekhov doesn't know how to find
misses them completely. They're relying completely.
There was a lot of static.
I realize it's a beam weapon and
a
it's
lot of
basically
static.
Impossible to miss, but somehow I did.
I know it's like the days when like Wometco and HBO were airing over, rabbit ears, and you're trying to get that to come in, and you're like adjusting in the static, and then all of a sudden you can see the movie for a second.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Bachelor Party.
Let them eat static.
and then all of a sudden you lose it. No, this can't be.
No.
Yeah, and remember how exciting it was when Star Trek II came out on VHS, and we don't even mention the fact that I think, and we said this before on the show, but
it was the first sell-through.
It was available for sale. Yeah,
$39.95, wasn't it?
Yes, but before that. Before the movie opened, Space Seed was released on VHS as the only episode of Star Trek on VHS to create an awareness of that episode.
Right.
And so all of a sudden that was, I forget what what they said on the box, but they were extolling it as like this great episode. And that was the beginning of not the rehabilitation, that's not the right word, but holding up Space Seed as this classic episode when that came out.
Re-education.
Yeah. Selective breeding. Pretty remarkable, and obviously the this mythology that dates back to '66 continues to be mined. Obviously, Strange New Worlds is doing a lot with it.
It continues to evolve too. I mean, in the original, in Space Seed, they still call it the eugenics wars, but by the time of Wrath of Khan, it was genetic engineering that had made Khan superior, which was not, something that was really talked about, I imagine, much in the late 60s. So,
it's true.
Science evolves, the world evolves, Star Trek evolves.
You are great. We are great. And this was a great episode. So thank you, Mike, for joining us. Khan, a fascinating character that continues to fascinate. And, and again, the one thing, and we've said this before, so there's no point going back, as great as this character is and as great as these episodes and movies are, you just go back to that amazing scene and it's just great writing and great acting. When Spock and Kirk and Khan are sitting around a dinner table,
just sitting at the table,
having a conversation, and it may be one of the great scenes in the history of Star Trek.
Yep.
And all it is people talking.
Forgive my curiosity, Mr. Khan, but my officers are anxious to know more about your extraordinary journey.
And how you managed to keep it out of the history books.
Adventure, Captain, adventure. There was little else left on Earth.
There was the war to end tyranny. Many considered that a noble effort.
Tyranny, sir? Or an attempt to unify humanity?
Unify, sir? Like a team of animals under one whip?
I know something of those years, remember? It was a time of great dreams, of great aspiration.
Under dozens of petty dictatorships.
One man would have ruled eventually. As Rome under Caesar. Think of its accomplishments.
Then your sympathies were with...
You are an excellent tactician, Captain. You let your second in command attack while you sit and watch for weakness.
You have a tendency to express ideas in military terms, Mr. Khan. This is a social occasion.
It has been said that social occasions are only warfare concealed. Many prefer it more honest, more open.
You fled. Why? Were you afraid?
I've never been afraid.
But you left at the very time mankind needed courage.
We offered the world order. We.
Excellent. Excellent.
You know, warfare concealed.
It's good
on a social occasion. Just amazing. I mean, that, you know, I'm sure we've done this great Star Trek scenes, but that is truly one of the greats, and it's a testament to great acting, great writing, all the things that make television work. So, anyway. But so good having Mike back with us. It's been a while since we've had you on the show. Hopefully it won't be as long before you come back. And, of course, Mike will be with us in Vegas this August. We're looking forward to him joining us at the Trekspert stage. As also Darren mentioned earlier, you can join us every day on the Discord channel. That's in the show notes, where a lot of the listeners and hosts drop by to talk about all things Trek and beyond.
The Treksperts were your host. You choose to repay that hospitality by trying to steal his ship and murder him.
By forcing him to eat in the food court.
Yeah.
Inglorious Treksperts is a production of the Treksperts Podcast Network. Mark A. Altman, Darren Dochterman, Ashley Miller, executive producers. Peter Holmstrom, Brian Mixer, producers. Mark Rivera is our audio sound mixer. John Carney is our social media manager. Treksperts. Inglorious Treksperts is copyright 2025 by Treksperts Plus and is available wherever you listen to podcasts or on video, now on video on Spotify and YouTube. You can review Inglorious Treksperts wherever you listen, share your thoughts, and grow stronger through the sharing on your favorite social media platforms. And we hope you'll join us next Thursday for an all-new episode of Inglorious Treksperts. But until then, on behalf of returning champion Michael Sussman, Ashley Edward Miller, Darren R. Dochterman, and myself, Mark A. Altman. You want to take us, Mr. Sussman?
Keep on trekking ingloriously.
Ingloriously.
Of course.
Of course.
Indeed.
Boy, I think I need a tranquilizer. Good night.
Suddenly, the Reliance phasers blasted into the Enterprise's engine room. Kirk shouted into the intercom.
Scotty, damage report.
Admiral, the main power is out. The warp engines are wrecked. Whoever's on that ship knew just where to hit us.
A face appeared on the bridge view screen. Kirk couldn't believe his eyes. It was Khan.
Ah, Admiral. I see you still recognize me after all these years.
What do you want, Khan?
I want your life, Kirk. However, I'll spare your crew if your computer transmits all your data on the Genesis project.
Agreed.
Kirk turned away from the screen with a secret smile. Spock whispered to Kirk.
Admiral, you can't give him Genesis.
I won't, Spock. I'll use our computer to lower his shield so we can fire back.
Rapidly, Kirk programmed the computer, then turned to face Khan.
Get ready to receive our transmission.
The computer sent out its signal, and Reliant shields dropped.
Fire phasers, Mr. Sulu.
The blast exploded into Reliant.